This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
All right, welcome into episode 97. Today is a special day. We have Raegan back on the show. Yes, she is a reoccurring guest now joining us. It's been a while since we caught up with her, but we wanted to go over a couple of samples. So we talked about data from two vehicles that she owns, go over some interesting results, what might have caused those results, as well as just talking about a lot of things in general, life in general. Raegan's an interesting person, and I think that this is a talk you will all enjoy. So without further ado, here's myself and Raegan in studio. But part of me is just always like, we grew up with really unreliable cars.
Yeah.
So it was like a blessing to be like, oh, I'm not worrying about this thing in my life is controlled.
Yeah.
Every 3 years. It's a new thing.
No, definitely.
But, you know, obviously with this job, being able to know what kind of shape the engine is in is a bonus, the transmission and all of that.
Absolutely.
But like, part of me wishes it was a Toyota.
Yeah.
You know?
No, Toyotas are like the best. I feel like my Prius is, well, I'm sure we'll like talk about it, but yeah. It's a trooper for sure.
So like, has oil analysis changed what you look for in a vehicle at all? Like, do you have anything that you want to steer more towards when you're picking an option for whatever you might drive next? Or
I feel like it doesn't necessarily change what I look for. Like, you know, I'm always kind of going for something a little more spacious, good on gas, but I feel like it does give like a ton of peace of mind.
Yeah.
You know, like buying a used car, which, you know, all the cars I bought have been used, it definitely helps. Like, okay, if it has a head gasket leak or something, you know, we're going to find that. So that does help.
And with the Prius, how long did you have that before you started here?
Let me think. I think like right before. I feel like maybe a month before. Yeah, because when we went out there with Ryan, I don't even think I had an oil change yet. When I did my first sample on the Prius, yeah.
So what did the first sample? Okay, well we have it right here. So yeah, the first sample from your Prius, honestly, looks about as good as it gets. You had a lot of sodium though.
Yeah, that sodium had me concerned.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we see high sodium like that, the concern is going to be possible coolant contamination. So because that was my first sample, I had not even changed the oil in this vehicle yet. That was actually the oil that was in it when I bought it from the dealer.
Okay.
So I didn't know the brand, you know, so with that level of sodium, it could be additive. But, you know, I was watching the coolant level just in case it was dropping. Didn't see anything like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I was very eagerly waiting that next sample.
Well, it's interesting because I was like, okay, with how nerve-wracking it can be, I wanted to see if you sampled it again within like 6 months and 1,000 miles or something. And you're able to let it go for a little bit. So did you just kind of have some good peace of mind in the sense that no noticeable coolant loss, the engine's doing well, you're like, okay, we'll just let this ride for a little bit?
Yeah, pretty much. And also, I was not commuting very far in that vehicle. So I lived just a few miles from work, so it wasn't seeing a ton of use.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's no need to change the oil if the miles are low. But, you know, I still wanted to do it after a few thousand miles to really keep an eye on that sodium level. But luckily, in the very next sample, it dropped. So it went from 112 all the way down to 11, which isn't a level that leaves us concerned about coolant at all.
Yeah.
I think that confirms that it really was some kind of additive in whatever oil the dealer was using.
Yeah. Looks like it. And then the second sample, everything was pretty chill. You had a little more iron. Do you think that was due to a longer run, or what might have influenced that increase there?
Yeah, I think a longer run, also some idling, you know, just in city traffic, kind of idling. That was right in early spring, so, you know, potentially some idling time while the engine's warming up before I drive to work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that could have caused iron, but, you know, not too bad, just a few parts per million from averages. So I wasn't too concerned about that iron level, not enough to shorten my oil run or anything like that.
Yeah. And then the other big swing, I guess, to discuss here was after you made the move. So tell me about that process, the move, how that all went. And so obviously, I mean, you had to drive to get there. So how was that?
My Prius did amazing. Yeah, so we drove from Indiana to California. Was about a 35-hour drive. And we made sure to check the engine over as thoroughly as possible before we left. So, I got it into a mechanic. They did say that the serpentine belt needed change. That was a little worn. So that is something we did. And, I told them I'm going to be driving this vehicle to California. So, please tell me everything it needs.
Yeah.
Did some new tires, but nothing on the inner workings of the engine. Everything was okay. No concerning leaks or anything that they noticed.
Yeah.
So, on the way to California, we had no issues at all. Yeah, it was completely great. Spent hardly anything in gas compared to what it could have been.
How many miles is that?
Like
Roughly.
Good question.
that's a journey out there.
2,000 or 3,000.
Did you do it straight shot or?
Yeah, we didn't stop at all.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's probably better than like sleeping at an econo lodge halfway through, but like it's still a lot.
Yeah, it was rough. But we had 2 little chihuahuas with us.
Oh,
so I'm
sure.
like, I don't know how stopping at a hotel would go with them, So, we're like, let's just power through. And, it was great. The Prius was super comfortable. And, no issues at all.
So now, in the latest sample, you had a couple things we marked in bold, namely a high iron level and some fuel. What do you think is going into that iron level? Is it mainly a change in operation or just simply more miles? What's your stance on that, given that you know exactly the use it's seeing?
Yeah, so that sample was run about 10,000 miles. So, some of that iron is just going to be accumulation over that longer run. But also, the Prius was really working hard leading up to this oil run. So basically, for the first few months of 2023, my husband was doing like handyman contractor work, but he didn't have a work truck yet. So he hadn't found one that he liked. So he was driving my Prius to job sites every day, which meant it was loaded up with bricks and pavers and concrete bags. Yeah, it was loaded up heavy every single day. And, idling in a lot of traffic, which could explain both iron and some of that fuel.
Yeah.
So,
sure.
it was really working hard. So I'm honestly kind of impressed to see iron at just 28 parts per million. I feel like it could have been much higher. And I feel like another thing that tells us is that, we can't really tell what kind of use a car is going to be seeing or a truck, a Prius, you might not expect that it's going to be having such, tough operational conditions, towing concrete throughout the city. But definitely a factor here.
You can never assume. I mean, I've seen minivans that ended up being used for racing that I didn't know about. They had to let me know that after the fact. I have seen like Priuses where they later mentioned towing. So you really can't assume anything, which I think can kind of frustrate people sometimes, but there's always more than one explanation for an increase here or there. So it's just kind of interesting how that works. So switching gears to the S10, that was the other vehicle in your file that I know some samples from I want to go over. So how do you end up finding the truck, first off?
So that was one that we bought used. It had just had maybe 2 owners in its life, and it had been pretty well maintained, it seemed. So they had some maintenance records on it. They had regular oil changes about every 5,000 miles or so. So it looked to be in pretty good shape when we got it.
Yeah, metals were fine. The only thing, I don't know, sometimes I get too wrapped up in like the balance of metals sometimes I feel, but I can't help but notice it starting out at copper being dominant. And then bearing wear, which, obviously it's one of the 2 bearing metals, and then that increased from here. Definitely like a long oil run, but it looks like, if that S10 is experiencing even a fraction of what the Prius was, like, some of that's bound to be operational, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that this oil run was really long, at 10,000 miles. So we really jumped from 2,000 to 10,000. Life just got busy, and it kind of got away from us. And so, that's one of the reasons also that we advise customers to not do such big increases. Because, a lot of this could be accumulation over the longer run. And we'd have a better idea of that if we had done more, incremental oil changes.
Right.
So, definitely long run a factor. And probably some hard use is causing some of that bearing wear. But luckily there is an oil pressure gauge in the truck. So
good, yeah.
Yeah, able to keep an eye out for low oil pressure, and that hasn't happened yet. So we haven't seen that. And then also, we're monitoring for unusual noises.
Right.
And going to check back after a shorter run.
Interesting. Yeah, because, I mean, you could very well do those 10,000-mile intervals, repeatedly if metals are consistent and the engine's running well. It's enough to keep an eye on for sure. I think, like, after you've looked at enough of these, you kind of, what looks like a potential concern, but it definitely isn't an obvious problem either. Like, it's right in that gray area, I think.
Right. Yeah, especially with the use that the truck is seeing. Some extra metal is just going to be, the cost of doing business here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, something to watch. But if metals are stable, then I think, we'll be content. It's more if they increase much from here, or if we see low oil pressure or something that we might be more concerned.
So something that I think is interesting, just more so going to your background, since you were a bio major and then you specialized in microbiology and biochemistry, do you find, like, describing sources of elements, where they can be from, the variety of explanations, was that always something that came more natural to you, like when you started here? Or this being oil analysis in such a different, I mean, I'm sure you weren't talking about anything oil related in school, but did it still come natural to you, describing these sources and explanations and all of that, just right when you walked in the door?
I think so, yeah. So, spectral analysis is something that's very commonly used in biology and chemistry. That's something that I'd used in college. So, spectral analysis is really useful when you're trying to determine the elements in anything, whether that's a sample that you're working with in the biology lab or an oil sample.
What were, like, samples you'd commonly test in the biology lab?
So that would be things like if we're doing a biochemistry experiment and trying to purify a protein.
Okay.
Then that might be something that we run through the spectral exam to see, what kind of elements are present, or the concentration of.
Like, when you walk around in the lab, is this all, like, have you done some semblance of this before, as far as, like, setting up samples to be run through a spectrometer and, like, the various other components of our analysis? Had you, like, just by chance done any of these tests before when you were in school?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely spectral analysis. The viscosity index that we use is a little bit different than what I used in school. But yeah, also determining sample travel time through a defined area, then that's something that I've done before. And also the bacterial testing. So, we don't get to do that too often, but there are fuel samples that come in where they're interested in, whether bacterial contamination is a concern. So with my microbiology background, that's something that's really interesting. I always love looking at those samples.
Yeah. I just think you'd have such a leg up, I mean, obviously in a lot of ways, but knowing that there are multiple explanations for where these elements come from, and also there's, several reasons why, or countless reasons why, any result might be in or out of spec. That's such an advantage, I think, in the training process, because I think when you're new to this, having to mentally sort through, like, okay, there's 3 different areas that aluminum could be coming from, and having trouble to make sense of all of that. But, like, you would have walked in knowing, well, of course there's more than one possible reason for this or that result.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, having that nuance coming from a science background is definitely really nice. And then also being able to kind of see how the other elements are going to be informing, where aluminum is from. So having that analytical background in science definitely helps.
And I think, like, when it comes to writing up the comment, if anything, the only weird thing would be, like, switching to such a conversational tone here as opposed to what you would use in school, right?
Right. No, scientific writing is definitely extremely formal, to the point that it's almost difficult to read sometimes if you don't have that specialized training in how to read and write in that format. So it's definitely different to write a Blackstone in conversational tone, but I think that it's also really important. So to be able to express something that we could say it in a very complicated manner, but it almost shows deeper understanding if we're able to break it down into simple terms.
Because it seems like, I guess one question I always like to ask analysts in these Meet the Analyst episodes is, like, did you come in the door as a writer first or an analyst first? And I think, like, you definitely had both because you had to, you had scientific writing background, but would you say you're more so an analyst and then you kind of picked up the Blackstone language or just kind of our prose, I guess I would say, you were more so an analyst and understanding the data and then kind of adjust it to speaking it in lay terms.
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely an analyst first. So I found this job because I was looking for a laboratory position.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
Yeah, and then I found Blackstone Labs and thought, what an interesting way to utilize, spectral analysis and laboratory tools to let people know how their engines were doing. That's something that I had never, an application of science I had never considered. So yeah, it was really interesting. I definitely was able to kind of adapt my writing style to be more conversational. But for sure, the laboratory environment and analysis is what brought me to Blackstone.
Yeah, that's really cool. For me, I was looking primarily for a writing gig where I knew I was going to be creating content every day. And it just so happened to be this. And again, it's like an application I never knew about either.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting how we can find it and what we can make of it. So
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if you had a chance to check out, there's an episode I did with Brian, and during a Meet the Analyst episode with Brian, I learned that he went to Mexico and he was in Michoacan, and he almost, unbeknownst to him, got himself in an arranged marriage almost.
I did hear that episode. Yeah, no, I was not expecting the question about the picture of him on the website to go that direction. Yeah, I was pretty shocked.
So the reason I bring that up, you did 40 days solo backpacking in the middle of Mexico?
Yeah, it's so funny. I was actually in the same town that Brian was in
What?
Michoacan. Yeah, no, it was so crazy.
I was just hoping you were going to be remotely close. You're like, oh, same area.
Same area, yeah. So I wasn't only in Michoacan. I went kind of like a tour of Mexico, starting in Mexico City, just like a self-guided tour, sort of. And I did about maybe like a week or two in each place that I went. So yeah, I did about a week where Brian was in Michoacan, actually. Yeah, very mountainous, beautiful city. But yeah, nestled right there in the mountains in Michoacan.
That is such a crazy coincidence.
I know.
And a really cool one.
Yeah.
I know he had a great time. Like, other than almost getting in an arranged marriage, he had a fantastic time.
Yeah, other than that slight
he
detail.
dodged that bullet, then he's okay.
Yeah, I didn't know he spoke Spanish, so that's a pretty cool detail to know about him.
He didn't tell me he actually spoke Spanish. I just figured, like, he was doing enough to get by.
Oh, yeah, maybe. Enough to, like, get himself in an arranged marriage. So, some at least.
Fantastic. Oh, my gosh. That's so cool. Yeah. So, do you still, a couple other things I pulled from your bio, do you still do your own oil changes when you can? Or is that something that, like, you might not have the means to dispose of, like, the used oil where you are? Or, like, what's your setup now? Do you still do your own work when you can?
I haven't really done any work on the Prius. So when I was doing my own oil changes, it was when I had a Nissan Xterra because
easy.
Yeah, I could easily just fit right underneath it. Didn't need to jack up the vehicle or anything like that. But the Prius is incredibly low to the ground.
Yes.
Yeah, so you have to jack it up, and I don't have jack stands. Where I'm at now, so it's kind of just like costs more effort, I think, than it's worth.
Sure.
So I think it's definitely important to know how to change the oil. Just good knowledge to have. But now I usually find some kind of deal on Groupon and usually get it done for cheap enough that it's worth just taking it in.
Yeah, and of course, like, having the ability to know the work that was done just by looking at analysis and seeing, like, I know even Ryan took his Elantra into a dealership, I believe, and they said they changed it, and it clearly looks like the wrong oil. Like, it looks like used oil. It had enough metal in it, enough insolubles that, like, that was run for a period of time. And if there's ever that doubt, you can always just look at the sample and just see.
Yeah.
For peace of mind.
Exactly. I definitely think that the last oil change place I brought it to thought I was a little bit crazy. I didn't have the sample containers with me. I had, like, a used Arby's cup. And I was like, can you put some oil in this?
Works.
And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
So, it worked. But they were definitely giving me some weird looks about that.
I always get weird looks when I ask for a sample from anyone. And I'm like, I know it's a little out of left field, but I'm like, don't give me a hard time. Like, this is my oil.
Right.
You're just handling my oil. It's always awkward, but it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And before we go, just as a bonus question for my own interest, I feel like it might be both. Did you see Barbie or did you see Oppenheimer?
I've seen Barbie. I intend to see Oppenheimer.
I feel like you're in that unique position where, like, you would love both.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if that's all that unique. I like them both. But I saw Oppenheimer first, and then I saw Barbie with my wife. But yeah, you'd really dig Oppenheimer, I think.
Really?
I mean, not just because it's science-y, but also it's just like, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't assume you want to watch a 3-hour period piece about I don't know. It is kind of an intense, dramatic experience, but I found it to be really entertaining. And, like, they did a good job of explaining the science enough where you can follow along a bit. Like, I don't know anything about quantum mechanics, but, like, I remember some of it.
I mean, every now and then I'll get into, like, a YouTube deep dive on quantum mechanics and, like, the theory of relativity. And I'm like, kind of just random bits of things like that. So I think I would enjoy it. But what do you think of Barbie?
Barbie was really interesting because I had no idea that you could have that movie happen, like, now. A nuanced commentary that is attached to a massive commercial product, and you still are able to kind of take creative risks, and it's really entertaining too. I was like, wow, it's kind of crazy that this thing exists, because you should expect, like, oh, it's brought to you by Mattel. Like, this is going to be, like, painfully corporate.
Right.
And it's not. So it's just kind of very surprising in that sense. Almost as surprising as so many people, like, actually going to see Oppenheimer. Because I'm like, that many people? Because, like, I mean, nothing really gets me excited like a 3-hour Christopher Nolan movie. But, like, I know that's not, like, going to be the case for most people. And it's still going to make probably $1 billion. So it's like, that's pretty surprising, too. So, yeah.
Yeah, hopefully I get to see it maybe this weekend or, coming up. But, yeah, I heard you're supposed to do, like, they call it Barbenheimer, where you see them in the same day.
That's so much.
Yeah, that's a lot of movie watching.
My friend asked me to do that, and I couldn't. But, like, that is collectively 5 hours of pure movie, and then, like, the rest of the time spent sitting in a theater with, like, trailers and stuff. And that's just, I don't know, maybe someday. But, yeah, had to run that by you.
Yeah.
So. All right, well, it's good having you back on again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun chatting with you.
Now a recurring guest on the #1 oil analysis-related podcast in the world, I think. So cool. All right, thanks, Raegan.
Thank you.
All right, that was Raegan and I in studio, mostly breaking down data. Took a couple interesting turns, though. It's been a while since she's been here, so actually, after we wrapped up what we planned on talking about, we decided to stick around for a little while, shoot the breeze. I think it was interesting, maybe you will too. So stay tuned for some bonus content with Raegan and I. Doing these episodes on my own, it's still embarrassing for me when I'm like, I'm going to have to restart that talking point, Josh. But when you think about it, I mean, it's just, I don't know. People underestimate how difficult it is, and also it's never as bad as you think.
Yeah.
But conversely, sometimes it's not as good as you think.
Yeah, I know.
But it's always a middle ground, and I don't know. The guest episodes always end up being ones that I look back on and I enjoy, and that's probably because I'm tired of hearing myself.
Really?
But also, oh my God, I can't stand, like, you know when you're little and you hear your voice on, like, an answering machine for the first time? I don't know if you had that moment where, like, you're like, that's what I sound like?
That's me, like, every time I take a video or something. Or in the last episode, I'm like,
oh. No, you were good. And Miranda's episode, I really liked. And, I think when I asked her, she was like, really? And I was like, yeah, like, just jump on the show and just, we'll just talk about whatever. And I had all these questions that were not oil related to kind of get the ball rolling. And then I ended up just staying on that path because I was like, this is more fun for me. So I was like, are you a Logan's or a Texas Roadhouse kind of person? And then I was like, I have an affinity for chain restaurants. And then, like, we were just doing all that. And of course we did get into oil analysis, but I was just like having a lot of fun with that. All that to say, there's always nerves on the guest end, but it turns out being better than you think all the time.
Okay.
But when I'm solo recording a monologue and I'm like, leave the booth, I'm like, I think that was pretty good. And then I play it back and then I'm like, damn it, it's still me. So, no, I'll let our producer know that we're done. So yeah, I thought it was good though.
Okay. Yeah, people really like it. I mean, I've seen so many people write it. I feel like every day it's at least one or two things saying they love it.
Yeah, the engagement is very good. But yeah, it's kind of like I forget. So we talked about previous jobs on the last episode. Have you worked in retail? I know you said food service. You did some kind of
Dairy Queen.
Dairy Queen.
Yeah.
But did you ever do retail?
Never.
Well, this kind of, I don't know. It applies to Dairy Queen too. You could have 100 people say nice things to you, and they're very just cool. And then you have one person who like gives you a hard time or is like insulting, and that one person totally outweighs the 100 people who are like, have a nice day, and they meant it.
Yeah.
It's the same thing that I have to remind myself of with the pod, because like there will be like a YouTube comment here or there. But I know the diehard fans want us to talk about the data, so we are. But like, no, like, allow me some time to ask Miranda about Logan's. Allow me some time to ask Brian about like how he seemingly won a March Madness bracket without ever watching college basketball.
I know. I was like what?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, I honestly had no idea what I was doing.
I was like, let me have this. But yeah, that's just kind of like the cost of doing business. And it's cool. Like, we do have a ridiculously good following in general. Like, the fact that people write in every day is really cool.
Yeah, no, for sure.
All right. Hope you enjoyed a little bit of Blackstone bonus content featuring Raegan and I. That brings today's episode to a close. Thanks for listening. This is Blackstone Joe signing off.
The Slick Talk podcast is powered by Blackstone Laboratories. If you're ready to start your oil analysis journey, visit blackstone-labs.com to order your free test kit.